There is a particular kind of tragedy that only happens to people with extraordinary gifts. Not the tragedy of failure, not the tragedy of being overlooked or underestimated or never given a chance. Those are their own kinds of pain, and they're real. But the tragedy I'm talking about is different. It's the tragedy of someone who had everything, power, calling, purpose, and lost it not to an enemy stronger than them, but to something inside themselves that they never learned to control. This is the story of Samson. And before you think you know where this is going, let me tell you something. Samson is one of the most complicated figures in the entire Bible. He is not a clean hero. He is not a simple man of faith who does everything right and gets rewarded. And he is a man of violent contradictions, supernaturally strong and deeply weak at the same time, called by God and frequently acting like anything but. He is, in other words, very human. His story begins before he was born. That's where the most important stories always begin. His mother was an unnamed woman from the tribe of Dan, whose husband was named Manoah. She had never been able to have children, a condition that in the ancient world carried tremendous social weight, tremendous grief. Then one day, an angel appeared to her. "You are barren and childless," the angel said, "but you are going to become pregnant and give birth to a son." But the angel didn't stop there. He gave her instructions that would shape everything that followed. "Now see to it that you drink no wine or other fermented drink, and that you do not eat anything unclean, because you will become pregnant and give birth to a son. No razor may be used on his head, because the boy is to be a Nazirite, dedicated to God from the womb. He will take the lead in delivering Israel from the hands of the Philistines." A Nazirite, set apart, consecrated, holy. The uncut hair wasn't just a symbol of masculinity or strength. It was a visible external sign of an internal consecration. Every day that Samson went without cutting his hair was a day that said to the world and to himself, "I belong to something beyond myself. I am not my own. I carry a calling that is bigger than my appetites." That was the gift. And that was the burden. Because gifts of that magnitude don't come without requirements. The supernatural needs a vessel that can contain it. And the question that Samson's entire life would answer is this: what happens when the gift is genuine, but the vessel keeps cracking? Samson grew up, and it became clear very quickly that the angel's promise had been literal. The Spirit of the Lord would come upon him, not occasionally, not in quiet moments of prayer, in sudden, explosive surges. In moments of conflict and crisis, a power would flow through his body that defied every physical law. Ropes that bound him snapped like burned thread. Chains fell away, and enemies who thought they had him cornered discovered they had made a terrible mistake. But even before we get to the famous feats of strength, the story gives us something more revealing. Samson wanted a Philistine woman, not an Israelite, and not someone from his own people. A Philistine, a woman from the very nation that was oppressing Israel. His parents were horrified. "Isn't there an acceptable woman among your relatives, or among all our people?" his father asked. "Must you go to the uncircumcised Philistines to get a wife?" But Samson had made up his mind, and the pattern was already establishing itself, a pattern that would repeat throughout his life with devastating consistency. Samson saw something he wanted, and he went after it, regardless of what it cost, regardless of the warnings, regardless of wisdom or consequence or the voice of anyone who loved him. On the way to meet this woman, something happened that told us everything about who Samson was. A young lion came roaring toward him. Not a glimpse of a lion in the distance. Not the sound of a lion somewhere in the brush. A young lion coming directly at him, full force. The Spirit of the Lord came upon Samson in power, and he tore the lion apart with his bare hands. The Bible says it as simply as that. He tore it apart as one might tear a young goat. And then he continued on his way. He didn't tell his parents what had happened. He just kept walking toward the woman he wanted. Later, returning to marry her, he passed the carcass of the lion, and inside it, a swarm of bees had made honey. He scooped the honey out with his hands and ate it as he walked, giving some to his parents without telling them where it came from. And from this, from a dead lion, from honey, from a private miracle nobody knew about, Samson constructed a riddle. He posed it to 30 Philistine men at his wedding feast, wagering 30 sets of fine linen and clothing. Out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet. 7 days they had to solve it. 7 days they couldn't. So they went to his new wife and threatened her. "Coax your husband into explaining the riddle for us, or we will burn you and your father's household to death." She came to Samson with tears. She wept at him for 7 days of the feast, pressing him, begging him, telling him he didn't love her if he wouldn't share the answer. And on the 7th day, because he couldn't bear her tears, he told her. She told the Philistine men. They came to Samson with the answer before sunset, and in that moment, Samson understood exactly what had happened. He looked at his wife and said words that burn with betrayal. "If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle." He paid the bet. He paid it by going to another Philistine town, killing 30 men, and taking their clothes. Then, burning with anger, he went back to his father's house without his bride. His new wife was given to his best man. This was how Samson's first marriage ended, with riddles and threats and weeping and betrayal and 30 men dead, with Samson burning with anger and walking away, and this was only the beginning. Sometime later, Samson came back for his wife. He came with a gift, a young goat, the ancient gesture of reconciliation. But her father met him at the door and wouldn't let him in. "I was sure you thoroughly hated her," the father said, "so I gave her to your companion. Isn't her younger sister more attractive? I'd take her instead." Samson's response to this was perhaps the most bizarre act of vengeance in the ancient world. He caught 300 foxes. He tied them tail to tail in pairs. He attached a torch to every pair of tails. He lit the torches and released the foxes into the standing grain of the Philistines, into the grain, the vineyards, and the olive groves. All of it burned. When the Philistines found out who had done it and why, they burned down the house of his former wife and her father. The very thing they had threatened to do to her if she didn't betray the riddle, they now did anyway, because her marriage to Samson had brought catastrophe down on their nation. Samson saw it, and he attacked them, viciously. And then he went and lived in a cave. The Philistines came to the tribe of Judah looking for him. 3,000 men of Judah went to the cave and found him, their own people. And they said to him, "Don't you realize the Philistines are rulers over us? What have you done to us?" Samson said, "I merely did to them what they did to me." His own people came to bind him and hand him over. He let them. He agreed to be bound with 2 new ropes on the condition that they wouldn't kill him themselves. They tied him and led him down from the rock toward the waiting Philistines. And then the Spirit of the Lord came upon him in power. The ropes that bound his arms became like charred flax. They melted and fell from his wrists as if they had never been there. He looked around him. There, on the ground, was the fresh jawbone of a donkey. He picked it up, and with it, he killed 1,000 Philistine soldiers, 1,000 men, with a jawbone, and one man standing in a field when the killing was done, surrounded by 1,000 bodies. He called that place Ramath Lehi, the hill of the jawbone. And he was so thirsty from the battle that he cried out to God, the first time we hear him pray, "You have given your servant this great victory. Must I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised?" And God split open a hollow place in the ground, and water came out, and Samson drank, and his strength returned. He judged Israel for 20 years, but the pattern was still there. Always the pattern. The extraordinary gift, the ordinary weakness, and between the two, a gap that kept getting wider. Some time after, Samson went to Gaza. Gaza, the heart of Philistine power, the most fortified city they had, to the place where any self-respecting enemy of the Philistines would know not to go. Samson went there and was seen with a woman. Word spread immediately. The Philistines of Gaza surrounded the place, set an ambush at the city gate, and waited through the night. In the morning, they said among themselves, "We will kill him." At midnight, Samson got up. He walked to the city gate. He took hold of the two massive doors, the gates that held the city secure, the giant wooden and iron structures that required mechanisms and multiple men to open and close. He tore them loose, posts and all, bar and all. He put them on his shoulders and carried them to the top of a hill, not to destroy them, not to burn them. He just moved them. He picked up the city gates and carried them somewhere else, as if to say, "Your strongest defenses mean nothing to me." And then he left, still alive, still burning, still completely uncontrolled. After this, Samson fell in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek. Her name was Delilah. The Bible doesn't explicitly call her a Philistine, but the valley of Sorek was Philistine territory, and what follows tells us everything we need to know about where her loyalties lay. The rulers of the Philistines came to her, all 5 of them, the lords of the 5 great Philistine cities, the most powerful men in their world. And they made her an offer that was almost impossible to refuse. See if you can lure him into showing you the secret of his great strength and how we can overpower him so we may tie him up and subdue him. Each one of us will give you 1,100 shekels of silver, 1,100 shekels each, 5 lords, 5,500 shekels of silver total. In a world where a laborer earned 10 shekels a year, this was a lifetime of wealth offered in a single conversation, a fortune that could change everything: her home, her status, her security, her entire future. Delilah agreed, and here is where the story becomes almost unbearable to watch. Not because of what Delilah does. Her betrayal, while ugly, is at least straightforward. She was paid. She delivered. What becomes unbearable is what Samson does, or rather, what he doesn't do, because from this point forward, every step toward destruction is a choice he makes with open eyes. Delilah went to him. She didn't disguise her question, not really. She asked him directly, with almost insulting transparency. "Tell me the secret of your great strength and how you can be tied up and subdued." Your girlfriend asks you how you can be subdued. Let that sit for a moment. Samson lied to her. "If anyone ties me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, I'll become as weak as any other man." She tried it that night. The Philistine lords were waiting in another room, ready to rush in the moment he was helpless. She called out the words that would become a terrible refrain. "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He snapped the bowstrings as easily as a strand of yarn snaps when it touches fire. Any person of normal self-preservation instinct at this point would have been gone, would have understood clearly what was happening, would have packed his things and walked out and never returned. And the woman he loved had just attempted to hand him over to his enemies. This was not ambiguous. This was not a misunderstanding. Samson did not leave. Delilah pressed him again, not with shame, not with apology, with accusation. "You have made a fool of me. You lied to me. Come now, tell me how you can be tied." He gave her another false answer, new ropes that had never been used. She tied him while the lords waited in the room. She called out. He snapped the ropes from his arms like thread. Again she pressed. Again he lied. 7 locks of hair woven into a loom this time. She wove them while he slept. She called out. He woke and pulled everything free. 3 times, 3 betrayals, 3 attempts to destroy him while he slept in her home. And still he was there the next morning, still returning, still staying. The reader wants to grab him by the shoulders and shake him. Every person who has ever heard this story has thought, "Leave, just leave. Why won't he leave?" But we know why. We know because we have all, at some point, stayed somewhere we should have left. Because the feeling was real, even if the situation was dangerous. Because love, or what we believed was love, made the warning signs easier to rationalize than the longing was to give up. How can you say, "I love you," when you won't confide in me? Delilah pressed. "This is the 3rd time you have made a fool of me and haven't told me the secret of your great strength." She nagged him day after day, pressed him and pressed him with her words until, the Bible says, he was tired to death. Tired to death. Not afraid. Not convinced. Just exhausted. Worn smooth by relentless pressure until there was nothing left to resist with. The wall, rebuilt 3 times, had finally run out of materials, and Samson told her everything. "No razor has ever been used on my head," he said, "because I have been a Nazirite dedicated to God from my mother's womb. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as any other man." When Delilah realized he had finally told her the truth, she could feel it, the difference between a man still hiding and a man who had finally surrendered. She sent word to the Philistine rulers immediately. "Come back once more. He has told me everything." They came. They brought the silver, all 5,500 shekels of it. She let him fall asleep with his head in her lap. And while he slept, a man came in and shaved the 7 locks from his head. His strength left him, quietly, without drama, like a candle going out in a room that was already mostly dark. She called out, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He woke. He stood. He shook himself as he had done before, every time before, absolutely certain that nothing had changed. The Bible adds 4 words that carry more weight than almost any other 4 words in the Old Testament. He did not know. He did not know that the Lord had left him. He had lived with this power for so long, had used it so casually, had confused it so completely with his own strength, that when it quietly withdrew, he didn't even register the absence. He thought it was still him. He thought it was still working. Until the Philistines grabbed him, and it wasn't. They seized him. They gouged out his eyes, a brutal, deliberate act of permanent humiliation. They brought him to Gaza, to that very city whose gates he had once carried on his shoulders as a casual demonstration of contempt. They bound him in bronze shackles, They put him in the prison, and they set him to work at the grinding mill. The strongest man who had ever lived, stumbling blind in endless circles around a millstone. The man who had killed 1,000 soldiers with a jawbone, now grinding grain like an animal. The judge of Israel, now entertainment for his enemies. The laughter of the crowd must have been tremendous. The Philistines were celebrating. Their god Dagon had delivered Samson into their hands, they said. The great enemy, the terror, the man who had haunted them for 20 years, now blind and bound and grinding grain like an animal in their prison, now helpless, now theirs. They gathered in the temple of Dagon, a massive structure full of men and women, with the rulers of all 5 Philistine cities present. 3,000 people on the roof alone, watching, celebrating. They called for Samson to be brought out so they could entertain themselves at his expense. A boy led the blind man in by the hand. Samson shuffled into the temple, unable to see the crowd, unable to see the pillars, unable to see the celebration all around him. He asked the boy who guided him, "Put me where I can feel the pillars that support the temple, so that I may lean against them." The people were mocking him, cheering, laughing. But something had been happening in that prison. Something the celebrating crowd didn't know about, and the Bible tells us, quietly and with enormous significance. But the hair on his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. He had been alone in the dark, in chains, grinding grain, and in that darkness he had come back to himself. In the humiliation and the blindness and the captivity, Samson had found again what he had spent his whole life mismanaging. He had found God again. He prayed. In that temple, with his hands on the 2 central pillars, he prayed. It was not a complicated prayer. It was not a beautiful prayer. It was the desperate, honest prayer of a broken man who has nothing left. Sovereign Lord, remember me. Please, God, strengthen me just once more, and let me with one blow get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. Then Samson reached out, one hand on each of the 2 central pillars. "Let me die with the Philistines," he said, and he pushed. The temple came down on the rulers and all the people in it. The roof collapsed. The walls fell. 3,000 people on the roof alone. The 5 lords of the Philistines, the same ones who had paid Delilah to betray him, crushed in the rubble. The Bible makes a quiet mathematical statement about this moment. Those he killed at his death were more than those he killed during his life. His family came and took his body and buried him with his father. A man of volcanic contradictions, of supernatural gift and human weakness, of calling and catastrophe, buried quietly with his people. I want to talk to you honestly about this man, because Samson is uncomfortable. He is not David, who despite his failures kept reaching back toward God and writing psalms of repentance. He is not Joseph, who endured injustice with grace and eventually forgave the people who destroyed his life. He is not Noah, quietly building in obedience while the world laughed. Samson is reckless, impulsive. He marries women his parents warn him against. He uses his gifts as personal weapons of revenge. He carries city gates as a show of strength. He tells his secret to a woman who had already tried 3 times to betray him. He is not the kind of hero you want to hold up as a role model. And yet the Bible includes him. In the Hall of Faith in the book of Hebrews, among the great names, Abraham, Moses, David, the name Samson appears, not despite his story, but as part of it. Why? I think because Samson's story tells the truth about something most of us don't want to admit. Gifts and character are not the same thing. You can be genuinely, supernaturally gifted. You can have real calling, real anointing, real power flowing through you, and still be deeply unformed in the areas that matter most. Still be a person who follows appetite over wisdom. Still be someone who chooses what feels good over what is good. The presence of the gift does not guarantee the presence of the character to carry it. Samson had the gift from birth. He never developed the character to match it. And the Delilahs of our lives. And I want to be careful here, because Delilah is not just a woman. She is a metaphor. They are very good at finding the exact place where our character hasn't caught up to our gifting. They press there, not once, not twice, but over and over, day after day, until we are tired to death, until we tell them everything. What is your Delilah? What is the thing? The relationship? The habit? The compromise? The appetite you keep feeding, that keeps asking you for the secret of your strength? What has tried to bind you 3 times already, and you're still there, still giving it one more chance, because the feeling is real, even though the danger is also real? That is the question Samson puts on the table, not with neat answers, not with a tidy resolution, just with the image of a man sitting blind in a prison, grinding grain, slowly growing his hair back. But here's what I don't want you to miss. The end of the story is not the prison. The end of the story is not the darkness and the humiliation and the grinding and the mockery of the crowd. The end of the story is a man who was broken, completely broken, with nothing left, who in that brokenness found his way back to the one prayer that still counted. Sovereign Lord, remember me. Not a prayer of strength, not a prayer of confidence, not a prayer from the hillside before the battle when everything felt possible. A prayer from the ground, from the prison, from blindness and defeat and complete dependence. And God answered it. There is something in this that I find more encouraging than almost any clean victory story, because the clean victory stories are hard to relate to when you're in the prison, when you've made the mistake you swore you'd never make, when you're sitting in the rubble of something you built and then tore down with your own hands, when your hair has been cut and your eyes have been taken and you're going around in circles. Samson's prayer from that prison tells us something about the nature of the God he prayed to, that God answers broken prayers, that he responds to, remember me, the same way he responds to the most eloquent petition ever composed, that the distance between you and God is never your worst decision. It's only your refusal to turn around. The hair grew back. It always grows back. The question is whether we use it differently the second time. Samson didn't get a second life. He got a final moment, 1 prayer, 2 pillars, and the most devastating act of his existence. He went out in destruction, not redemption. His story doesn't have a clean ending, but the God who answered his last prayer is the same God who is listening to yours right now. Whatever prison you're grinding in, whatever mistake brought you there, whatever version of Delilah wore you down until you gave up the thing you swore you'd protect, Sovereign Lord, remember me. That's enough. That has always been enough. The fire is low now. The night is quiet. And somewhere in the dark, the hair is growing back.